was supposed to be a celebration. That's how they pitched it anyway. A soft spring evening at the Grantwood estate. Trimmed hedges and lantern-lit paths. Champagne on silver trays. Noelle's name scripted on everything from napkins to menus like she was royalty. And in a way, she was the daughter of Clarissa Grant, Aries of charm and venom. And me, the man history had rewritten as an embarrassing footnote. I knew the moment I stepped onto the estate grounds that I didn't belong. I could feel it in the way the valet took my keys like he was doing me a favor. In the way heads turned, but no one made room. It wasn't my world anymore. Maybe it never was, but I came for Noelle. She had texted the day before, brief, almost reluctant. I know it's awkward, but you can come. Just keep things peaceful, please. I didn't ask what that meant. I just showed up. Clean shave, dark blazer, the same cologne I wore the day she was born. I stood near the edge of the lawn by the hedges, holding a flute of something dry and expensive I barely sipped. Noelle had looked beautiful, radiant. Her smile was quick, nervous. When she saw me, it softened, just for a moment. That was enough. Then came the moment I'd made the mistake of moving toward the garden archway to take a photo of the string lights when I saw her. Clarissa, my ex-wife, still as impeccably groomed and emotionally frigid as the day she told me I didn't fit the narrative anymore. She had a way of entering a room like a curtain of perfume and frost. Her heels struck the cobblestone like gavel hits. She'd spotted me from across the lawn and made a beeline drink in one hand and her mother's silver bracelet glittering on the other. I didn't brace myself. I should have. You don't get to loiter around like a proud father. She hissed as she reached me, voice low but sharp. You're not my husband anymore. I'm Noel's father, I said calmly. That hasn't changed. Clarissa's eyes narrowed like a lynx, focusing for a kill shot, and then she raised her voice. You're not my husband anymore. She barked loud enough to halt the string quartet mid-ong. Heads turned. Some gasped. Some whispered. Some smiled. And then she shoved me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe she'd had just enough to drink. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, I lost my footing. The marble edge of the fountain was slick beneath my loafers. My arms windmilled. I tried to steady myself on the wrought iron rim, but it was too late. I plunged in backward, arms flailing, spine slapping the water with a splash loud enough to echo across the lawn. Cold chlorinated water swallowed me whole for a moment before I bobbed back up, soaked and stunned like a washed-up extra from a bad sitcom. The silence broke quickly. Gasps turned to laughter. Laughter turned to applause. I heard someone say, "He's lucky we even let him in." I sat there, water dripping down my face, my shirt plastered to my chest, blazer floating like a sad cape around me. Somewhere, a waiter whispered, "Should I help him out?" And someone else snorted, "Let him marinate." And that's when I smiled. I didn't stand. I didn't flail. I just sat up straight in the water, my arms resting on the edge of the fountain like a man enjoying a casual soak. I looked at Clarissa, mascara perfectly intact, rage blooming in her chest like wildfire. I looked past her, too, at Noelle, who stood frozen in her pale yellow dress, jaw slack, a champagne flute trembling in her hand. At Dominic, her fiancé, awkwardly trying to decide if he should step in. At Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, who watched me with the same bored contempt he wore at our divorce hearing. Then I said just one thing, clear, calm, almost casual. Remember this moment. The laughter died fast, not all at once, but like a candle guttering out in a draft. Some chuckles lingered, unsure of themselves. A few guests looked away. Clarissa opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Maybe it was the smile. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way I didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't crawl. Just sat there, dignified, dangerous. A waiter finally moved, offering me a hand. I took it. My shoes squished as I stepped out of the water, droplets falling like punctuation marks around me. I peeled off my blazer and laid it neatly over a nearby chair. Someone tried to offer me a towel. I waved it off. I walked past Clarissa without a glance, water dripping down my slacks and into her carefully manicured grass. She flinched just slightly, as though my wet presence might stain her air. I walked back to my post near the hedges and picked up my barely touched champagne flute, and I waited. They had no idea what was coming. They thought the fountain was the punchline, the peak of humiliation, but for me, it was only the start. The fountain didn't break me. It baptized me. The wet blazer still clung to my skin like a second insult. I'd refused the towel they offered, not out of pride, but because I didn't want anything from them. The laughs had faded, the whispers had turned. I stood at the edge of the lawn watching them pretend I wasn't there, as if I could be erased with enough champagne and piano music. Clarissa had disappeared back into the tent, probably to spin a version of the fountain story that made her the victim. That was her way, always the fragile heroine in her own theater of cruelty. But I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand anything because I hadn't come here to win their approval. I had come to deliver the answer to a question they hadn't dared to ask. What happens when the man you discarded stops playing along? The first sign was the silence. It rolled in slow like fog on a battlefield. Guests stopped mid-sentence, turning toward the gates. Even the musicians, unsure whether they should resume playing or remain frozen in awkward anticipation, turned their heads. The estate gates creaked open. You could hear it all the way across the lawn, an old groaning metal song that echoed through the manicured hedges and clipped perfection of the Grantwood property. Everyone's heads turned, eyes narrowing toward the source like curious deer, sensing a predator nearby. And then the car appeared. Not just any car, a black Mercedes Maybach, long and low to the ground, its polished frame gleaming beneath the string lights, like it had been born from shadow and wax. Behind it, two more dark vehicles, quiet, seamless, and sync. Not limos, not hired Ubers. These weren't for show. They were for precision. The kind of arrival that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with power. Clarissa emerged from the tent just in time to see the back door of the lead car swing open, and out stepped Corandre, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Three-piece charcoal gray suit, marbled cufflinks, and that expression he always wore. Like he'd already read every move you were going to make and decided it wasn't worth blinking for. Corin wasn't just my lawyer. He was my scalpel, my sword, my silence weaponized. People turned to each other asking in hushed tones who he was. You could hear the ripple. That's Corandre. Wait, is that the Corandre? He's the guy who handled that offshore property case in Geneva. No. That's the guy who got that pharmaceutical CEO out of a billion-dollar fraud trial. What's he doing here? Corin didn't acknowledge them. His eyes were on me, calm, cool, focused. Then the rear door of the second car opened. Tessa stepped out like she was walking into a boardroom she already owned. All black hair swept into a loose knot, her heels clicking softly on the estate's gravel path. She didn't smile. Tessa never smiled when she worked. She was half business advisor, half investigator, and fully uninterested in anyone's opinion. She nodded once at me before walking up beside Corin. That was the moment the laughter died for good. Clarissa's smirk evaporated. Her hand tightened around the flute she was holding. She turned to her father, the old judge, as if to ask what he knew. He looked just as confused. Good, because they were about to understand just how far behind they'd fallen. Corin approached me first. He didn't comment on my soaked shirt or my dripping shoes. He simply handed me a fresh navy blazer pressed and folded with a silk pocket square in the exact shade of lust blue. It wasn't just a change of clothes. It was a reminder I was never out of moves. Corin turned toward the crowd. No microphone, no raised voice. He didn't need one. The hush was so complete, he could have whispered and they still would have heard every syllable. Mr. Locke has a few documents to present, Corin said, his voice calm and rich like velvet hiding a blade. You could feel the pulse of panic skip through the crowd. People shifted, murmured. A few looked to Clarissa. She was frozen. Tessa stepped forward, opening a leather-bound folder. She held it against one arm like a judge presenting evidence. Her eyes scanned the lawn, stopping briefly on Clarissa, then Mason, Clarissa's brother, and finally the judge. She didn't blink. Well, be brief, she said, tone clipped and precise, but thorough. Clarissa stepped forward, her heels stabbing the grass. This is a private event. You don't have the right to. Corin held up a hand. Please don't interrupt. You're still in possession of company property and pinning assets. That makes this very much our business. My former in-laws looked like a jury being caught with evidence in their pockets. Noelle had moved closer to Dominic, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Her eyes flicked between her mother and me, something flickering in them I hadn't seen in years. Curiosity. Maybe even something like hope. Clarissa scoffed, trying to regain her footing. This is a stunt, an embarrassment. No, I said quietly, stepping forward, wearing the fresh blazer-like armor. That was the fountain. This is something else. Corin reached into the folder and withdrew the first envelope. Legal notifications, he said. Filed, stamped, and served. No one moved. Tessa added, This isn't a party anymore. And that was the moment it shifted. The laughter didn't return. The derision didn't flare up again. People stopped seeing me as the man who fell into a fountain and started seeing me as something else, something they hadn't accounted for. Clarissa's expression didn't change, but her hand trembled slightly, just enough. That was enough for me because they thought the fall was the end, but it was just the start of their descent. Clarissa was still reeling. I could see it in the way her nostrils flared and how she kept glancing toward her father like she needed him to regain control of a room she thought belonged to her. She always thrived on theatrics, her voice, her wardrobe, her timing. But this wasn't her stage anymore, and she was beginning to feel it. Corin turned toward her, calm as ever, and handed her a sealed manila envelope. The kind of envelope that smells like law offices and ruined legacies. He didn't say much, just enough. Official notification, he said, his voice steady, barely raised. Clarissa took the envelope with 2 fingers like it might be contaminated. What is this? Your future, Corin said. Or what's left of it. I watched her tear it open. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and I could see the way her posture changed. Rigid spine, shoulders angling defensively. She was bracing for impact, but the blow was already in motion. Effective immediately, Corin continued. You are no longer the majority owner of Lockrest Media. She looked up slowly, her face blank, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Corin replied, folding his hands neatly in front of him. We spent the past 18 months acquiring controlling interest through holding entities and private shareholders. All legal, all documented. She blinked hard. Impossible. I would have known. No, I said quietly, stepping forward. You wouldn't have because you weren't looking. You were too busy painting me as obsolete to notice the foundation shifting beneath you. Clarissa's gaze snapped to me, fury blooming in her cheeks. You think you can just waltz back in and take what I built? I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm reclaiming what was always mine. The difference is, I didn't need a headline to do it. Behind her, Mason approached her brother, the eternal yes man. He tried to snatch the documents from her hand, but Corin blocked him with a single subtle step. Tessa moved in too, her presence quiet but unmistakable. "You're going to regret this?" Mason hissed, glaring at me like a schoolyard bully, unprepared for someone who studied law and revenge in equal measure. "Regret?" I asked. "No, I already did that. I regretted giving you all the benefit of the doubt. I regretted letting my name get buried in your narrative. I regretted thinking loyalty was louder than ambition. But now I don't feel a thing." Clarissa tried to laugh. It came out brittle, hollow. "You're trying to embarrass me in front of Noelle. That's all this is." I turned slowly to face my daughter, who stood a few feet away in her pale yellow dress. Her expression caught somewhere between shock and awe. "Noelle," I said, "this isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about truth. You deserve to know what's really going on in this family. What's been hidden behind curated images and press statements." She didn't respond. Not yet. But she didn't look away either. Clarissa finally barked. "This doesn't change anything." But that's where she was wrong. It changed everything. 2 years ago, I was living in a rented apartment off Arbor Lane with a broken credit score and a box of court papers that felt like a coffin. Clarissa had taken the house, the cars, the public sympathy, and worst of all, my daughter's distance. People said I should move on, find peace, write a memoir, and let the dust settle. But I don't believe in letting anything settle that was built on lies. So I rebuilt quietly, carefully. While they laughed at the idea of me consulting for boutique firms, I bought into them. When they said I'd never touch Lockcrest again, I started acquiring small shares through offshore proxies, a trust in Cyprus, a holding firm in the Caymans, a shell company based out of Luxembourg. They were puzzles only someone like Corin could assemble, and he did. Tessa came later, a former corporate auditor with an intuition for deceit. She found the gaps in Clarissa's paperwork, the unreported bonuses, the irregular deposits. She traced every dollar Clarissa moved to keep her socialite status intact, including the ones she used to fund this very party. I didn't need to crash the engagement party. I owned the rights to the tablecloths and the marquee, and now everyone here knew it. Mason tried again, louder this time. "This is fraud. You orchestrated this behind our backs." Corin tilted his head. "No." "What?" "What you're describing is called strategy. What Clarissa did with company funds. That's fraud." Clarissa stiffened. "Watch what you say, or I'll sue." Tessa pulled another document from the folder. "You might want to read this before you get litigious." Clarissa snatched it and scanned the lines. I saw the moment the blood drained from her face. Corin leaned in slightly, his voice low. "That's the internal audit you never thought anyone would authorize. It shows how you funneled over $600,000 into non-businessness accounts for personal use. Engagement party included." "You can't prove that." "Oh, we can't." Tessa said, "Your name is on every transfer, and we have the emails." The murmurs in the crowd surged again, louder this time. Guests looked at each other like they were finally realizing the evening wasn't about candlelight and romance anymore. It was a corporate earthquake dressed in formal wear. Clarissa opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at her father again. The judge, the man who had backed her through every dirty move, but even he couldn't stop this. He just sat there, jaw clenched, the weight of reputation finally pressing down on him. "You thought the divorce gave you control?" I said, my voice calm, low. "It gave you what you asked for, but not what was underneath." Clarissa stepped back. Just one step, but it was all I needed. That was the step of someone who realized they weren't the hunter anymore. They were the hunted. They didn't know who I was anymore. But to be fair, they never really did. Standing there surrounded by half-frozen champagne flutes and whispers that now carried a sharper edge, I felt more grounded than I had in years. Clarissa's face, twisted with disbelief, was the same face I'd once watched laugh in court as the judge handed her most of our assets. Her family had always treated me like the outsider, presentable enough for holidays, just charming enough for public photos, but never worthy of a seat at their true table. Not the decision-making table, not the legacy table. And I'd accepted that once. The weight of being less than draped over me like a suit that never quite fit. But all of that was before the fall. Not the fountain, the real fall, the divorce, the financial scorched earth policy they called the settlement. The day I left my own house with nothing but my name and a black duffel bag. That was the moment I stopped playing their game and started building my own. 5 years ago, I stood at the threshold of a one-bedroom apartment with no heat and peeling paint, holding that duffel bag like it still meant I had something to offer the world. I slept on a futon for 2 years, never once complaining, not even when the winter air bit through the cracks in the window frame. I didn't have much, but I had clarity and time, and something far more dangerous than rage. Silence. Silence lets you observe. Silence lets you build. I started small consulting gigs for struggling businesses, strategy calls for up-and-coming tech firms too green to know their own worth. Most paid me in equity, some in late checks and handshake promises. I kept all the receipts, every slide deck I made, every dollar I reinvested. I watched companies fail and grow. I learned what made people desperate. I learned what made people reckless, and I took notes on everyone. It started with one shell company, then 3, then a portfolio of 12 silent partnerships, all layered beneath Locke Strategic Holdings, a name I chose deliberately. I wanted it to sound like a legacy, and maybe because it was. Just not the one they expected. While Clarissa held her galas and recited carefully crafted interviews about weathering her past, I was buying into boardrooms quietly, legally, and methodically. The key wasn't revenge. It was anonymity. Every acquisition was a chess move. Every fund to pressure point wasn't chasing her. I was moving right under her, laying the groundwork for the kind of coup that never made headlines until it was already done. I still remember the day I bought the first batch of Lockrest Media shares, only 2%, through a proxy firm in Dublin. Barely a whisper, but that was the crack in the dam. Over the next 18 months, I used every contact I had, former partners, disillusioned shareholders, quiet dissenters in the company Clarissa thought she owned. Some of them sold just despite her. Others had no idea who they were really selling to. It didn't matter. Piece by piece, I reclaimed what she never deserved. Corin found the final key, an overlooked clause in the post-divorce business division contract that Clarissa's lawyers never read closely enough. It allowed for restructuring if controlling interest changed hands, a clause that had sat dormant until I hit 51%, and then 62%. That was 72 hours ago. The morning I crossed the threshold, I stood in my office, a minimalist floor in a downtown high-rise, the walls lined with glass, not portraits. I wasn't interested in showcasing what I'd built. I was interested in what was still left to take. Tessa was already there, tablet in hand, coffee steaming beside her. "It's time," she'd said without looking up. "Everything filed?" I asked. She nodded. "Filed, time-stamped, secured. The transfer emails went out an hour ago. Ward notices are her on their desks." Corin had stepped in a moment later, a thick folder in hand. "Shall we save the date?" I didn't smile. I just said, "Noel's engagement party. They won't expect it." There had been a brief pause, long enough for Tessa to glance up, her expression unreadable. "You're sure?" she asked. "Absolutely. Because I didn't want a press conference. I didn't want a boardroom coup. I wanted a garden filled with champagne and artifice. I wanted the same curated elegance they had always used to make me feel small. And I wanted to reclaim it. Not with a bang, but with a signature. Now, standing under the same string lights they once toasted under without me, I wasn't thinking about humiliation. I wasn't thinking about the fountain or the gasp of guests. I was thinking about the woman who once told me I was lucky to be married to her. The woman who told me, "You're not built for empire." The woman who now stood shaking with an envelope in her hand while the empire around her cracked beneath the weight of its own ego. They didn't know who I was anymore, but they were learning. Every whispered conversation, every side-eye from a guest trying to gauge which side of history to stand on, every dry mouth swallowing regret. Clarissa wasn't used to being outplayed. She didn't know how to handle it. She moved like a cornered animal, nostrils flaring, smile plastered over panic, trying to spin a new reality faster than the old one fell apart. "None of this changes what people think of you," she hissed when she finally reached me again. "You're still the man I left." "No," I said quietly. "I'm the man you didn't see coming." She opened her mouth to retort, but I stepped around her, leaving only the scent of ink and precision in my wake. I looked up and met Noelle's eyes. She was watching, really watching. The kind of look that strips years off memory and makes you hope. I didn't wave, I didn't explain. I just nodded once and walked back to where Corin and Tessa stood waiting. Because foundations don't need applause. They just need to hold until everything else collapses. The scent of jasmine and wine lingered in the air, clinging to the tension that now stretched across the lawn like a taut wire. Moments ago, the guests had been raising toasts, posing under fairy lights, clinking glasses over shrimp canopies. Now they stood in uncertain clusters, champagne half-lifted, conversations paused mid-sentence, faces turned toward me in the small storm I brought with me. I stepped forward, the soft squish of my damn shoes meeting the manicured grass, the only sound in the brief hush. I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was shifting the axis of the entire evening. I looked directly at the string quartet, whose instruments still rested awkwardly in their laps after Clarissa's earlier outburst. "You can stop playing," I said flatly. "This engagement party is being recorded." Some guests laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Clarissa didn't. She snapped her head toward me, expression twisted with disbelief. "You're insane." "This is harassment." Then Corin stepped up beside me, holding a trifolded document with a gold seal and a judge's stamp. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. No flourish, just weight. Legitimacy. Finality. "This," he said, holding it high enough for Clarissa and her father to see, "is a court-approved authorization for emergency shareholder disclosures in a setting involving disputed corporate assets." "What the hell does that mean?" Mason spat, eyes darting to his father, who now stood ramrod straight with a face carved from courtroom marble. Corin continued, tone like a scalpel. "It means this isn't a party anymore. It's an emergency shareholder meeting, and this property." He gestured around us to the elegant tent, the rented stage, the manicured garden with its tailored hedges, was paid for in part by misappropriated corporate funds belonging to Lockcrest Media, which means this estate is now under formal dispute. Gasps, murmurs, a glass shattered somewhere behind me. Clarissa's eyes blazed. "This is a celebration for our daughter, not some circus for your ego." I stepped closer to her, calm, unblinking. "You made it a circus when you paid for it with money that didn't belong to you. You just assumed no one would ever trace it." Clarissa turned to her father. "Dad, say something." Judge Conrad Grant looked down at the document, reading the highlighted sections, scanning the signatures. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. And that silence, it was louder than any verdict he'd ever given from the bench. Mason pushed forward.
You're just bitter because you lost the divorce. You're jealous. This is just performance.
No, I replied. This is accountability. You all thought you could gut me in court, parade me out of my own life, and dance on the ashes.
I let you write me off as irrelevant. And while you laughed and misused company funds to inflate your image, I rebuilt. You used Lockcrest as your personal piggy bank, and I took it back, piece by piece, quietly, legally. Now we're here. This isn't personal. It's business.
Tessa joined us then, holding up her tablet. Would you like me to begin the disclosure summary? Clarissa shouted. This is still my daughter's engagement party. Tessa looked at her completely unshaken.
That's unfortunate, because according to the financial logs you authorized, this party is listed under a board-approved public relations initiative, which means it's company property, which means it's our concern. Dominic, Noelle's fiancé, stepped forward from the crowd. His tie was slightly loosened, his hands in his pockets like he was balancing anger and uncertainty. Is this actually legal? Corin turned to him, expression neutral. Absolutely. And your presence here as a potential beneficiary of Lowcrest standing makes you a relevant party under the shareholder ethics code. Noel's hand found Dominic's arm. He's not attacking us, she said quietly. He's fixing something. Clarissa lunged toward her. Don't you dare take his side.
But Noelle stepped back. Your side isn't what I thought it was. The air shifted again. It was subtle but unmistakable. I wasn't just a soaked man in a blazer anymore. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. Corin took a few steps toward the crowd. To clarify for all guests present, this disclosure will not involve names that aren't on record, and it will not involve any statements that haven't been court-cleared. We're simply here to inform relevant parties of discrepancies that affect company assets and legal ownership. You're free to leave, but if you choose to stay, you are now observers in an active shareholder deposition. I turned slowly and addressed the room, not with anger but with clarity. For years, I was painted as the one who failed, who walked away. But I didn't walk. I was pushed out of my marriage. Out of the boardroom, I helped build out of my daughter's life. And I took it. I wore it, but I didn't disappear. I turned toward Clarissa, who now looked pale. She still had her arms crossed, still wearing that mask of defiance, but her eyes were flickering, searching for a foothold that no longer existed. This moment, I said, isn't about revenge. It's about record and transparency. Two things this family has long avoided. Corin nodded. Shall we proceed? I glanced once toward Noel. Her expression wasn't just surprise anymore. It was something deeper. Maybe recognition. Maybe regret. Yes, I said. Let's begin. Tessa connected the tablet to a portable monitor set up near the tent's entrance, likely originally intended for a slideshow of Noelle's childhood photos. Instead, it now displayed a spreadsheet, columns, line items, transfer histories, account numbers, and with each new transaction revealed, the narrative cracked. Clarissa tried once more to interject, her voice shaking this time. This is still my daughter's party. But Judge Grant finally spoke. Clarissa stopped. She froze. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even look at her. But in those 3 words, the entire estate trembled, because the law, her lifelong shield, was no longer on her side. She wasn't the judge's daughter anymore. She was just another defendant. I stood beneath the lanterns that had once lit laughter and toasts, but now illuminated nothing but exposed truth. Clarissa's face had gone pale, Her jaw clenched so tight I wondered if she could even hear the sound of her empire crumbling around her. She was still trying to recover control, to wrestle the evening back into the polished fantasy she'd crafted for so long. But it was too late. I stepped up onto the small riser meant for the engagement speeches. My dress shoes, still damp from the fountain, left faint marks on the polished wood. The microphone waited on its silver stand, intended for Clarissa's father to bless the union, for Noel to say a few tearful words, for toasts and camera flashes and declarations of eternal joy. Instead, I reached for it. The murmurs dropped to a hush again. This time there was no confusion in their silence, just anticipation, a strange hunger. People love watching power shift, especially when it doesn't belong to them. I tapped the mic once, let the brief feedback sting the air, and then looked directly at my daughter. "Noel," I said softly but clearly, "I'm sorry. This isn't the engagement party you imagine." I know what it was supposed to be. A celebration of love, family, a future. She stood a few feet from the tent, Dominic at her side, her hand curled lightly around his forearm. Her eyes, deep brown like mine, held everything. Conflict, uncertainty, and something else. Stillness. I turned to the rest of the guests. "But if we're going to talk about a future, then we need to start with the truth. No smoke, no mirrors." I let that settle before shifting my gaze. I found Dominic in the crowd, his stance square, his expression guarded. His father stood beside him, lean, salt-haired, with the cautious posture of a man trying to decide if he was watching an implosion or an opening act. I locked eyes with Dominic. "Do your parents know?" I asked, "how this family has treated me? The man who raised Noel, the man who showed up for recital, birthday parties, every scraped knee, and science fair, even after I was dragged out of my own home." Dominic didn't blink. "They do now." His voice didn't carry anger, just understanding, a quiet kind of allegiance I didn't expect but appreciated. Clarissa surged forward, heels striking the stone like war drums. "This is not the time for this. You're humiliating yourself." I turned to her calmly. "Clarissa, this stopped being about me the moment you used company funds to manufacture this illusion. You turned a family milestone into a PR stunt. You invited everyone except the truth. You're using our daughter's engagement to air your grievances." I cut her off, not with volume but with finality. "No, I'm using this moment to reclaim what was stolen. My voice, my integrity, my place in a family that tried to erase me." I looked back to Dominic. "I'm not here to undermine your engagement. I'm here to make sure the man marrying my daughter sees clearly that you know what stands behind the curtain. Not just the curated photos and the floral arrangements, but the rod in the foundation." His mother, elegant, wearing a sapphire dress and pearls, stepped forward gently. "We'd heard things," she said, "but we assumed they were exaggerated. Clarissa's family presented a very different picture." I nodded. They always did. And I let them. For years, I stayed silent for Noel's sake. I let them distort who I was because I believed one day she'd come looking for the truth on her own. Clarissa tried again to grab the mic, but Tessa stepped forward just in time. Her hand didn't need to touch Clarissa, just hovered in warning. That was enough. Clarissa stepped back like she'd been slapped. I turned to my daughter. "Noel, I wasn't the perfect husband, but I was always your father. And when I lost everything, when your mother painted me as an afterthought, I never stopped showing up for you, even when I had to stand in the shadows of my own life." She was crying now, not sobbing, not dramatic, just quiet tears like something long buried was breaking open inside her. I held the mic in one hand and opened my other palm toward her. You don't owe me anything. I didn't do this tonight to win you over. I did it to stop lying by omission. Because silence can protect a child, but it can also suffocate the truth. Clarissa tried to speak again. She doesn't want your guilt trip. Dominic interrupted her. Clarissa, enough. The words stunned her into silence. Dominic stepped forward, his hand dropping from Noelle's. This day was about celebrating Noelle and building something honest together. But if you're telling me the people around her have built their lives on manipulation, then I want to know. I need to know. I nodded at him. Then you're already a better man than I was at your age. That made him pause, then nod. Clarissa's father stepped toward the stage, his face rigid with disapproval. This isn't the forum for this. It's the exact forum, I replied. Because this party was never just a celebration. It was a performance, one paid for with stolen funds, draped in false smiles, and hosted by a family who forgot that the truth doesn't need an invitation. Judge Grant didn't reply. He turned and walked off slowly as though a lifetime of control had finally rusted through. I stepped down from the riser. Noelle met me halfway. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around me like it was instinct, like the years of distance between us collapsed into this single, quiet moment. You didn't ruin the party, she whispered. You saved the story. Behind us, the lights flickered. The music hadn't returned. The guests hadn't resumed their clinking glasses. They were watching something they never thought they'd see. A man they once laughed at, standing calm in the eye of the storm with the truth finally on his side. And the real father-in-law finally acknowledged. It didn't take long. By morning, the headlines had already surfaced. Local outlets, then regional. By noon, it had gone national. A photo of me drenched in water, hair slicked back, standing calmly at the edge of the marble fountain with my hands resting on the stone like I belonged there. Because I did. A frozen moment in time that once would have been the punchline of the week, but now attached to the words shareholder coup and corporate fraud probe. It became something else, entirely powerful. The internet loves a fall, but it loves a resurrection even more. The first article titled it "The Fountain Fall Heard Around the Boardroom." Another called it "From Soaked to Sovereign." One of my favorites, Clarissa Grant's party crashes itself. But it wasn't just the photo or the drama that caught fire. It was the truth that followed. The documents, the footage, the audit, and it was all real. We hadn't edited anything. We hadn't needed to. The numbers spoke loud enough. Tessa's forensic trail paired with Corin's precision in legal framing laid bare what the Grant family had hidden behind their manicured brand for years. Clarissa's misuse of Lockrest media funds was no longer speculation. It was itemized fact. Dozens of expense reports masked as community engagement or employee development that turned out to be personal luxuries, spa weekends, estate renovations, designer contracts for Noelle's engagement party that were embarrassingly run through a company wellness budget. It was one thing to misappropriate funds. It was another to do it with such arrogance. Corin filed the hearing request by 9 a.m. sharp. I didn't even have to be there in person. He preferred it that way. Let the optics speak, he told me. You've already done the part that matters. So I sat in my office downtown, sunlight slicing through the blinds like gold bars on the floor, and watched the live stream, like a man watching history course correct itself. Clarissa tried to speak at first, always the orator, always sure the room belonged to her. But the hearing was tight, controlled. Every time she raised her voice or tried to inject emotion, the chairwoman interrupted with, "We'll get to that. Please stay with the facts." And the facts gutted her. Tessa walked the board through the timeline, receipts, bank transfers, even metadata from PDF edits. Everything connected. Each expense Clarissa had filed under the company ledger came with an annotated counterpart, proof of where the money actually went. The engagement party's garden rental paid through the Lochcrest Wellness and Cultural Enrichment Division. The crystal chandeliers strung above the tent filed as conference lighting. Even the champagne tower had been labeled as client entertainment. By the time the third slide came up on screen, the room had gone still. Not just the board, not just the Grant family's internal counsel, but the entire live stream audience watching it unfold like a corporate Greek tragedy. Clarissa broke somewhere near the 45-minute mark. "You people have no idea the pressure I'm under," she snapped. "Do you think it's easy preserving the image of a family falling apart?" Tessa didn't flinch. "That may be true, but you don't get to preserve an image with money that wasn't yours." Clarissa looked to her brother. Mason wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked to her father. He stared ahead, unmoving. For the first time, she stood alone, not just in name, but in consequence. And I didn't need to say a word, because the silence was finally working for me. They showed the fountain video next. Not just the viral clip from a guest's phone, but the footage from Tessa's discreet camera. A wide-angle, clear audio, Clarissa shouting, the shove, the splash, the laughter, the gasps. Then my voice echoing in the stillness. Remember this moment. It echoed again in the courtroom replay like a prophecy. I saw it all from my office. I watched as the story they thought would humiliate me became the one that unraveled them. And I didn't smile. I just sat still, feeling the weight of it all. Not joy, not revenge, but a quiet kind of justice that doesn't ask for applause. By late afternoon, the board voted to suspend Clarissa pending full investigation. She tried to argue, to pivot, to reframe, but the gavel came down figuratively and literally, and it was done. Clarissa Grant, the woman who once kicked me out of a boardroom with a condescending wave of her hand, was now under investigation by a board she no longer controlled. The PR fallout was fast and brutal. Lochcrest's social media page disabled comments within hours. Sponsors pulled their banners from the homepage. News anchors, who once fawned over Clarissa's philanthropic galas, now replayed the fountain video with slow-motion captions. Even the judge, her father, came under scrutiny. His signature had authorized several discretionary spending reports. Corin made sure to reference them subtly in the hearing, just enough to raise eyebrows, just enough to make the old man sweat. And through it all, I said nothing, because I didn't need to anymore. That evening, I got a call. Not from Clarissa, not from Mason, but from Noelle. She didn't speak at first. I could hear wind, maybe from a balcony or a park bench. Then her voice, "Dad." That word, simple and soft, did more to shake me than any verdict. "I'm here," I said. "I saw everything," she whispered. "I didn't know it was that bad." "It's okay," I said. "You weren't supposed to know. They made sure of that. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner or see it. I just..." She paused. "I guess I believed what they told me. That's what they wanted." Another pause. "Is it too late to start over?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said. "It's exactly the right time." I didn't need headlines. I didn't need the boardroom cheers or the shifting alliances. I just needed that because in the end, the public reckoning wasn't just about Clarissa. It was about me finally being seen, not as the man who fell, but as the one who stood quietly while the world caught up. The hearing concluded, but its tremors were only beginning to ripple through the walls of Lochcrest media and through the hearts of the people who once ruled it like a thief. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. Instead, I moved with precision. Every step, every decision was calculated, not for vengeance, but to restore what had been quietly dismantled in my name. 3 days after the board's suspension vote, I stood in the glass conference room on the 37th floor of the Locke Strategic Holdings building downtown. The room was bright, sun spilling across the long oak table, and at the far end sat Corin, flipping through a set of documents that would change the company's course. Tessa was beside him, expression sharp, tablet in hand. A digital trail of signatures and acquisitions lighting her screen. "This is the final set," Corin said, sliding a leather folder toward me. "You sign this and it's done. 62%. Full executive control reinstated under your name." I paused, fingertips grazing the leather. The folder was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. This was the moment. Not the moment of spectacle, not the party or the hearing or the social media chaos, but the quiet, personal shift that no one could take from me. Ownership. Real, legal, earned. I opened the folder and scanned the page. My name printed clearly beneath the company seal. Graham Locke. Founder, Executive Chair, Majority Stakeholder. Clarissa had always thought she won because she walked away with the building, the brand, and the sympathy. But she'd never seen the foundations, the architecture beneath the name. I had spent the last 2 years rebuilding those beams until she was standing in a penthouse she didn't even realize I owned. I signed. Corin nodded, collected the documents, and handed them to a courier waiting outside. "The trust is reinstated. Lockcrest's foundational clause is now under your protection, and we've restructured the board to include the original family trust as a voting member." Tessa leaned forward. "That includes your daughter." I looked at her, brows raised. "She doesn't even know about the trust." "She will," Tessa said, "by tomorrow morning." The trust. I'd buried it after the divorce, sealed it away beneath multiple firms, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I wasn't ready to watch it fall into hands that would misuse it. Lockcrest had once been meant for Noelle. That had always been the plan, until Clarissa and her family swept through it like locusts, leaving her future tangled in their vanity. But not anymore. I'd restored the trust quietly, legally, irrevocably, and Noelle's name was honored again. Not just symbolically, but as beneficiary, board proxy, and eventual successor. That afternoon I invited her to meet me. Neutral ground, a cafe near the water, tucked behind the marina, far from her mother's reach, and the eyes of the press. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and sunglasses large enough to hide what the last few days had probably done to her. When she saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. We sat across from each other, 2 cups of tea between us, steam rising slowly into the cold air. "You signed the documents?" she asked. I did. "So, it's yours again." I didn't correct her. Not because she was wrong, but because it wasn't about possession. It was about responsibility. "I've restored the original Locke family trust," I said, "the one you were removed from." She blinked. "I didn't know I was ever on it." "You were, until shortly after the divorce. They used a technical clause to reallocate it. You were 17, too young to contest it, too distracted by everything going on." "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked down at my tea because I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between us. I didn't want the company to be another battlefield. You were a child. It wasn't your burden to carry. Tears rimmed her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "So, what happens now? You're back on the trust. I said full rights control when you're ready. Until then, you have board voting authority." She looked stunned,
I thought you hated what Lockcrest had become. I did, but that's why I couldn't leave it in their hands.
She swallowed. Mom's furious. She says, "You manipulated everything. I didn't manipulate anything. I did what she did, only better. I just never lied about who I did it for." There was a long silence between us. A fragile moment, suspended in air. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me how bad it was?" I met her eyes. "Because I didn't want to win you back with money or power. I wanted to be your father, not your strategy." And that finally broke through whatever wall had been standing between us. She reached across the table and took my hand. Small, familiar. The same hand that once wrapped around my finger when she was an infant. The same hand I held through every scraped knee and dentist appointment and tearful breakup. "I wish I had asked sooner," she said. "I knew you would when you were ready." Later that night, Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, stood before his own legal advisory panel, grilled about signatures and authorizations tied to the trust transfers from years ago. His defense was weak, his paper trail weaker, and when Corin presented the override clause bearing his signature, dated 3 days before the trust was restructured illegally, the room shifted. "You won't get away with this," he growled at me moments before he was escorted out of the review chamber. Corin barely looked up from his notes. "You already helped us do it, Judge. Your signature's on the override." Clarissa didn't show her face. She didn't call, not even to scream. Her empire had cracked, and she was buried beneath the weight of it. And for the first time in years, I slept fully, deeply, without the ache of injustice beneath my ribs. Because I hadn't just reclaimed ownership of a company. I had given my daughter the future they tried to steal from both of us. And I did it without a single lie. I stood in the quiet of my penthouse living room, panes of floor-to-ceiling glass framing the city lights like jewels on black velvet, holding a glass of scotch I had no intention of finishing. On the coffee table lay a stack of unfiled reports, shareholder notices, and the court's final ruling on Lockcrest's ownership transfer. Tessa was still cross-referencing last-minute signatures in the adjacent study, and Corin was on the phone giving his parting remarks to the last group of disgruntled advisors who hadn't yet come to terms with the new reality. It felt surreal, this calm after the storm. A storm I'd summoned, yes, but also one weathered with deliberate composure. I'd thought revenge would feel sweet. Bitter maybe, but undeniably sweet. Instead, it felt weightless, like stepping out of a tight coat after years of wearing it too small. Then my phone buzzed once, twice on the leather armrest. "Noelle," I read her message. "Can we talk? Not about today." I knew exactly what she meant tonight. No public spectacle, no revelations. Just father and daughter finding their way back to each other. I wiped my glass with the heel of my palm and walked to the door. "Tessa," I called. "I'm stepping out for a bit." She looked up, eyebrows raised. "Dinner. Just some air." I gave her a half grin. "Stay safe." She nodded, pocketing her tablet, and I slipped out into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and I was alone with my thoughts. As the car descended 20 floors outside, the city pulsed, headlights streaming, sirens distant, life unfolding without pause. I spotted a black SUV idling beneath the building's awning. Tessa's car. She must have insisted on following, though she knew I liked space. I waved her off as I walked past. I headed for the waterfront promenade, the same path where Noelle and I had our first real conversation after the engagement party fiasco. The breeze off the river was cool and carried the sin of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Street lamps cast golden halos on the pavement, and the water glimmered like molten glass. I found her near the railing, hands in the pockets of her leather jacket, staring out at the water. She turned as I approached, her hair loose, catching the wind. Hey, I said softly. Hey, she echoed. We didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the city shimmer at our feet. Finally, I asked, need a drink? She gave a small smile. Maybe something warm. I led her to a nearby cafe, one of those hidden gyms with outdoor heaters and dark wood booths. We settled into a corner table and a waitress brought us 2 mugs of hot chocolate, hers with whipped cream, mine with a shot of espresso. Noelle took a long sip, eyes closing for a second. Thank you for what? For everything tonight. She paused, searching for words. You stood up for me, even when it meant tearing down everything She looked away as though the reflection of the street felt safer than my eyes. Everything I believed about my family. No, I said, I stood up for you. I stood up for the truth, and I did it because you deserve that. You deserve to know the people you love. She nodded. I always trusted you. Even when I stopped talking to you, I trusted you. Her words hit me in my chest like a fist. I know I wasn't perfect. I said, I made mistakes. I let them push me away. I thought I was protecting you by staying silent, but maybe I was just protecting myself. She reached across the table and took my hand. You protected me from the beginning. You just did it in ways I didn't understand. We sat in silence again, our mugs warming the space between us. I thought about Clarissa, about her fury, her denial, her absence now. No apology was coming. She didn't deserve one. And the silence between us was its own rebuke. Noelle broke the silence. What will you do now? I glanced at my watch, but the hour didn't matter. What do you want me to do? She looked at me, eyebrows wary. I want my dad back, not the strategist, not the shareholder. Just you. I felt a flush in my throat, the kind that makes your voice catch. That's all I ever wanted. She smiled, small but real. Then let's start. I squeezed her hand. Anything you need. She hesitated. Just stay with me tomorrow. Maybe talk about something else. My trip to Spain next month. College visits. Spain, I repeated, smiling. Yeah, tell me more. She leaned back, warmed by the chocolate and the promise of normally. It's not just a trip. It's for my study abroad program, but I don't know if I should go. With everything that's happened, I feel like I need to be here. You need to do what's best for you, I said. If Spain is where you'll find yourself, you should go. I'll be here waiting. She nodded, biting her lip. I'll think about it. We finished our drinks. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Books she'd been reading, a movie she wanted to see, her favorite coffee shop downtown. Normal things, precious things. When we finally stepped back into the night air, the rain had fallen. Just a sprinkle enough to glisten on our jackets. I offered her my arm and she linked hers through mine. Thank you, she said again. For what? For not letting me go without a fight. I paused under a lamppost, looking at her. You never did. She looked up at me, a flicker of laughter in her eyes. Good. Because I don't know what I'd do without you. We walked back toward the building, footsteps echoing. I thought about the month to come, paperwork to finalize, board meetings, public announcements. But none of that felt as important as this moment. The real victory wasn't the company. It wasn't the court's final ruling. It was this, reclaiming the role I'd lost, rebuilding the bond I'd misplaced, and doing it without apology. Because some things don't need one. By the time we reached the entrance, Noelle paused. Dad. Yeah. Good night. Good night, kiddo. I watched her head inside, safe and sure. Then I turned, walked to my car and slid behind the wheel. And for the first time in a long time, I knew without doubt that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No apologies needed, just the promise of tomorrow. 1 month later, the estate where I was shoved into a fountain was listed for sale. I saw the headline on a property wire at 8:30 in the morning. Grantwood Estate to be auctioned under bank order. A familiar photo accompanied the listing. The sprawling lawn, the stone fountain gleaming at its center, the balcony where Clarissa once delivered Grant speeches like she was royalty. The caption below read, "Former home of the Grant family, now in foreclosure following financial restructuring." I didn't smile. Not right away. There was a moment, just a moment, where I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. A kind of quiet that felt deeper than peace. Final. Clarissa hadn't called. Mason hadn't reached out. Even Judge Grant had retreated into whatever retirement shell he built to escape the collapse. No statements, no spin, just absence. It was perfect. I stood on the rooftop of my building, coffee in one hand. The city spread out in every direction like a world I finally owned again. Below me, cars moved like blood through arteries. Lives continued. But up here it felt still balanced. Tessa stepped out from the elevator behind me, tablet in hand, sunglasses resting on her head. Her coat whipped in the spring wind. "You're up early," she said, approaching with her usual half-smirk. "I never sleep late," I replied. Too much noise in my head. She handed me the tablet. Next acquisition already in motion. Investors are waiting for green light by Friday. I scanned the document. Details of a media subsidiary we'd quietly begun circling weeks ago. It was perfect, profitable, and vulnerable, just the way I like them. As I handed the tablet back, Tessa lingered. "You smiled in that fountain," she said, eyes fixed on me. Most people would have snapped, yelled, lashed out. "You smiled." I chuckled a low, dry sound because it wasn't the real humiliation. What was thinking I ever needed their validation? I took a sip of my coffee and stared out at the skyline. The fountain was just water, cold, brief. What they did to me years before that was the real betrayal, and I survived that. She studied me for a beat. "You're not like most clients." "No," I said. "I never was." Tessa didn't say anything for a moment, then more softly. "But that night changed you." I watched it. "It didn't change me," I said. "It revealed me." We both turned toward the edge of the rooftop where a glass barrier separated us from the drop. A quiet hum of traffic floated upward, but here it sounded far away, like the past. "Some people drown in moments like that," she said, her voice distant. "But not you." I thought about that night, the water clinging to my suit, the sound of champagne laughter behind me, Clarissa's triumphant smirk. Already picturing the group chat messages she'd send with photos of me flailing in the fountain. I'd felt the cold pierce through every layer of pride I still had. But I didn't react the way they expected. I smiled. I let the moment freeze, and I owned it. "No," I answered her. I swam through it. She looked at me, eyebrows raised, and I walked out dry. That silence between us lingered, a soft kind of acknowledgement, the kind you share with someone who's seen your blood on the floor and never asked you to bleed again. I stepped away from the edge and headed back toward the stairwell, coffee in hand. "Get a new coat," I said over my shoulder. "We've got a press call at noon." "Yes, boss," she called after me. By the time I reached the office below, Corin was already waiting in the executive conference room. Crisp suit, neutral expression. On the screen behind him was the company's new homepage. My homepage.
Lock Strategic Holdings was now Lockrest Global, and the landing page had changed overnight. It no longer bore the pristine, magazine-polished face of Clarissa or Mason or any other member of the old guard.
It had mine, not a pose portrait, not airbrushed. Just me, standing on the courthouse steps from last week's final hearing, suit damped from a light rain, umbrella folded at my side. Serious, present, real. Beneath the image was a quote I hadn't authorized but had no intention of removing. Sometimes the man you cast out is the one who rebuilds the house. Corin tilted his head toward the screen. Too dramatic? No, I said. I still on the image. Exactly right. He set a folder in front of me. Judge Grant officially recused himself from the trust oversight. Clarissa's assets have been frozen. Mason's involvement is under review. Everything you predicted is unfolding. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the signatures. Every page felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a home I was reclaiming. Not just for me, but for Noelle and my daughter. I asked. Corin smiled slightly. She's reviewing the Spain program, asked me to vet the school's financial backing. She trusts you now. Good, I murmured. That's all I ever wanted. That afternoon, I stood at the same fountain I'd been pushed into. Not at the estate, but in the park downtown. A similar marble design. Elegant, circular. A symbolic reminder. But here, I was alone. I leaned on the edge, staring into the water. Clear still. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photo. Noelle, at age 6, holding my hand at her school's fall fair. Her smile was big, toothy. I remembered that day. She'd won a prize for naming all the planets in the solar system in order. I let the photo drift down into the fountain, not as an act of letting go, but of honoring the man who never stopped showing up, even when he was uninvited. The water rippled once, then settled, and me, I walked away dry.